The British economy is collapsing. The UK, once the financial giant of the world, is now crumbling under the economic burden it can hardly support. Wages frozen, prices exploding, public services gutted. This is a clear descent. The mechanisms driving it, they are time bombs that have been waiting to explode for more than a decade. From crippling debt costs to a workforce vanishing into long-term illness, Britain is staring down the barrel of managed decline. The numbers are brutal, the choices were catastrophic, and the consequences are just beginning to hit home. This is how one of the richest nations on earth fell apart, piece by piece.
Britain's economy is under incredible strain, more than you may realise.
In July 2025, the average UK house cost £270,000. Sounds bad? In London, it's £562,000. That's not a house, that's a financial death sentence for anyone under 40. But wait, it gets worse. If you can't buy, you rent, and rents have surged. By July 2025, the average UK rent hit £1,343 a month, up nearly 6% in just 1 year. In London, £2,253 per month. That's more than many people's entire take-home pay. Wages haven't kept up, not even close. So you're paying more to live in the same place while earning the same money, or worse, less in real terms. And if you think this is temporary, you're wrong. This has been building for 15 years. The bottom 20% of UK households have experienced virtually zero growth in real disposable income since 2008. Zero. For a decade and a half. Meanwhile, house prices have nearly doubled relative to earnings since the early 2000s. Younger generations now face barriers to home ownership that would have been unthinkable 30 years ago. When people spend 30 to 40% of their income on rent, they can't save. They can't invest. They can't start businesses. The entire economy slows down. And if you think that's crushing, wait until you see what's quietly draining billions from the system every single day. Is Britain facing a point of no return? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're finding this breakdown eye-opening, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos that cut through the noise. The UK government is spending £111.2 billion per year just on interest payments. That's 8.3% of total public spending. More than education, more than defense, just interest on debt. Think about that for a second. The government is burning £111 billion a year just to service old debts. Not building hospitals, not fixing roads, not hiring teachers, just paying interest to bondholders. And it's only getting worse. After the 2008 financial crisis, debt exploded. The austerity gutted public investment. Then Brexit hit. Then the pandemic. The inflation surged, pushing up the cost of service debts even higher. Every shock piles more weight onto an already buckling system. This is what economists call a debt trap. You borrow to plug holes. The debt creates more holes, so you borrow more. And the cycle continues until something breaks. And while everyone's staring at the debt numbers, the real damage is being done somewhere they refuse to look. Before 2008, the UK's productivity grew about 2% per year. Since 2008, well, it's grown at just 0.3% to 0.5% per year. That's a 75 to 85% collapse in productivity growth. Why does this matter? Because productivity is everything. It's how much value each worker creates per hour. When productivity grows, wages can grow. Living standards improve. The economy expands. When productivity stagnates, everything else stagnates too. And that's exactly what happened. Between 1997 and 2010, the UK was one of the fastest growing economies in the developed world. Since 2008, it's been one of the slowest. GDP per capita would be £11,000 higher today if pre-crisis trends had continued. That's £11,000 per person per year that just evaporated. What causes the collapse? Chronic underinvestment? The UK has invested less than France, Germany, and the US for decades. But after 2008, it got dramatically worse. Public investment was slashed by 40% in real terms between 2010 and 2012. Private investments never recovered to pre-crisis levels. Without investments, you don't get any new machinery, new technology, or new skills. You don't get innovation, you get stagnation. That's precisely what Britain got. There's one factor that accelerated this decline faster than anyone predicted. And if Brexit was the wound, what comes next is the infection that never healed. Brexit was supposed to set Britain free. Instead, it changed the economy to a slower, more isolated future. The numbers don't lie. Since leaving the EU, UK goods exports have fallen somewhere between 6% and 30% depending on which study you trust. Either way, it's a massive hit. Before Brexit, EU workers filled critical roles in agriculture, hospitality, healthcare, and construction. Then, freedom of movement ended, and suddenly there weren't enough butchers, lorry drivers, nurses, or fruit pickers. Farms had to cull animals. Food rotted in the fields. Supermarkets ran short on goods. By 2025, nearly one-third of the UK's businesses still report labour shortages. Over 2.5 million working-age adults have dropped out of the workforce due to long-term illness, many of them unable to return because the NHS waiting lists have ballooned to over 7 million people. Over 4,000 doctors left the UK to return to EU after Brexit. Financial services firms relocated to Paris, Frankfurt, and Amsterdam. London, once Europe's undisputed financial capital, is losing its edge. The Office for Budget Responsibility estimates that Brexit will reduce UK productivity by 4% over the long run. That's permanent damage, not a temporary dip. A structural downgrade to Britain's economic capacity. Firms located further from the Irish border saw workforce reductions of up to 15.7% compared to less exposed firms. Brexit wasn't the only cause of Britain's decline. Years before the referendum, a policy quietly bled the country dry, ensuring that when Brexit hit, there was nothing left to lose. The Conservative-led coalition government launched an austerity program unlike anything Britain had seen in peacetime. Between 2010 and 2019, over £30 million was cut from welfare payments, housing subsidies, and social services. Public investment collapsed. Capital spending fell 31.9% in real terms between 2009 to 2010 and 2012 to 2013. That's schools, hospitals, roads, bridges, all underfunded or ignored. By 2023, the NHS had a maintenance backlog of £10 billion. Schools were literally crumbling, with concrete falling apart. The justification? The UK faced a debt crisis and had to balance the books. But austerity doesn't work. It reduces demand, which shrinks the economy, which reduces tax revenues, which increases the deficit. You end up worse off than when you started. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Austerity has imposed right when interest rates were at zero, meaning the government could have borrowed cheaply to invest. Instead, they slashed investment and let infrastructure rot. The result? An austerity program that reduced output by an estimated 2% of GDP, cost jobs, crushed productivity, and left public services in ruins. Between 2010 and 2018, real public spending per person fell by 5%. Real spending on public services fell by 3.7%. This had never happened before in modern British history. Not in the 1930s, not in the 1980s. Only the 2010s saw absolute declines in public spending per capita. And the worst part, all that pain, all those cuts, and the debt still skyrocketed. Public debt doubled as a share of GDP, from around 40% before the crisis to over 90% today. Austerity failed on its own terms. The real damage shows up in hospitals, waiting rooms, disability claims, and millions of people who simply vanished from the workplace. In 2025, there are 9.11 million people aged 16 to 64 in Britain who are economically inactive. That means they're not working and not looking for work. And the biggest reason? Long-term illness. In December 2024, 2.8 million people were out of the labor force due to long-term sickness. That's a record high. It's been rising since 2019, accelerating after the pandemic. And it's not just older workers. The biggest percentage increase has been among 25 to 34-year-olds. The most common health conditions: mental illness, depression, anxiety, and musculoskeletal problems like back and neck pain. Nearly 40% of those inactive due to long-term sickness now report having 5 or more health conditions. This isn't just a health crisis, it's an economic crisis. Why is this happening? NHS waiting lists have nearly doubled since 2020. People can't get treatment. Their conditions worsen. They drop out of work, and once they're out, it's incredibly hard to get back in. Of those who became inactive due to long-term sickness, 63% remained inactive. Only 16% moved back into employment. This is a vicious cycle. Austerity cuts NHS funding. Services degraded, people got sicker, they couldn't work, the workforce shrank, productivity fell, the economy weakened, there aren't enough workers to fill vacancies, even as unemployment remains relatively low. These numbers seem grim. Wait until you discover what they're hiding. Now, although these numbers may seem grim, just wait until you discover what they're hiding. Not all of Britain is declining equally. London's GDP per capita is more than double that of most northern regions. The capital is booming, at least in GDP terms, while everywhere else is being left behind. London's average house price in July 2025 was £562,000. In the northeast, the number is a lot higher at £168,000. It saw the highest house price growth, up 7.9% annually. Why? Because it's so cheap that even modest demand creates big percentage moves. But wages there are still far lower than in London. London, with its finance and professional services, weathered the storms better. But manufacturing towns, coastal communities, and rural areas were hammered. Jobs vanished. Investments dried up. Young people left for cities. Communities hollowed out. The regional collapse looks devastating, but someone's actually winning from it. So where does this leave Britain? And what does it mean for the rest of the world, particularly for the US? The UK's decline reinforces America's economic and geopolitical edge in several ways. First, the US avoided the harsh austerity that Britain imposed. After 2008, the US used stimulus, not cuts, to boost the economy. The result was faster economic recovery, stronger growth, and a labor market that rebounded post-COVID. The UK is still struggling. Second, US productivity has been significantly higher. While the UK's productivity has flatlined since 2008, the US has pulled ahead. The gap is now translating into higher wages, better living standards, and more economic dynamism. Third, investor confidence. When businesses look at where to invest, they see the UK's political instability, Brexit disruption, and stagnant growth, and they choose the US instead. American tech, finance, and industrial sectors are outperforming British equivalents across the board. The UK's decline is a cautionary tale. It shows what happens when you combine bad policy choices with structural weaknesses and external shocks. Cut investments when you need it most. Leave your largest trading partner. Impose austerity during a recession. Ignore regional inequality. And let public services decay. Britain's economic decline wasn't inevitable. It was a choice. Austerity, Brexit, underinvestment, political chaos, each decision compounded the damage. Now, 15 years after the financial crisis, the cracks are still spreading faster than Westminster can fix them. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit the like button, drop a comment with your thoughts on where Britain's economy is really headed, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one.